Hello, my fellow techies. Today we're going to be doing an intro tutorial to the Django framework using the Python language. Let's get to it. So this tutorial that we're going to go through, again, intro tutorial to Django. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a very small project. We're going to make a to-do list where all we can do is add items. We're not going to worry about deleting items for now. This is just for getting used to the framework. If you want to add the ability to delete items later, feel free to do your own research, add on to the project. If you want to give this a better design and make it your own, feel free to do that as well. Again, we're going to be focused on the framework and the functionality of the framework and working within it. So what is this project going to do? Well, basically, we have this form right here, and we can just call this whatever we, let's say, make Django tutorial. You can add that to our to-do list. That gets added to the list, and if we refresh the page, we notice that all of this information is still here because it is actually being saved in a database, and then this page is loading a database. So let us get started. Okay, so I have cleared out everything that I had in this project before. We're going to start from scratch. I am going to assume a few things as we go through this tutorial. I'm going to assume that you have at least a beginner level understanding of the Python language. I'm going to assume that you have a development environment set up already. If not, I have a video for that. I'll put that in the description as well. And I'm also going to assume that you know how to set up a virtual environment. If you don't know how to do that, I have a link for that, video for that. I'll link that in the description below. So with that in mind, we're going to set up a virtual environment. I'm going to use the virtual env wrapper module. So I will do make virtual env, and we'll call this to do because we're going to be making a to-do list. So I'll clear that out. And then what we'll want to do, now that we have a virtual environment, is we'll want to install Django. So you should be using Python 3. If you do Python -- version, you should be using Python 3. And then we'll want to do pip install Django. All right, and we are ready to go. So now that we have Django installed, let's clear this out again. We want to use a command once we're in the appropriate folder that we want to create a project in. We can use the Django admin command. And then after Django admin, we want to say start project and then the name of our project, which we'll call to do because we're creating a to-do list. And we'll see now that we got this folder to do, which has another folder called to do in here, as well as a file called manage.py. Manage.py is kind of like the lifeblood of our project. And in to do, we're going to have some configuration files. We have ASGI and WSGI, which are going to be for communicating with servers. We have settings.py, which is going to have a bunch of global settings for the project. And we have urls.py, which is going to create all of the URLs for our project. So the next thing we want to do is we want to navigate into our project, which we can do with a cd command, change directory. If you're on Mac or Linux, I think it's a little different in Windows. I forget. But cd into your directory. And then we can do another Django admin command, Django admin start app this time. And the name of our app, we'll call this home because we'll be building a home page where we can do this. And now we notice over here in our editor that we get another folder called home. So if we expand this, what do we get in here? Well, we get admin.py. We're not going to have to worry about that. We're also not going to have to worry about apps.py or test.py. We're only going to be focusing on models.py and views.py for the sake of this tutorial. So models.py is where we're going to create code to interact with our database. And views.py is where we're going to create code to interact with our browser. So the first thing that we want to do is let's get an HTML page loaded. So right now, if we were to refresh this page, we would notice that nothing is going to happen. And that is because our Django project is not running. In order to run our project, what we'll have to do is we'll want to say Python manage.py run server. And this will only work if you're in the same folder where manage.py is. This manage.py is really the path to manage.py. I'm in the Steam folder, so the path to manage.py is just the name of the file, manage.py. So Python manage.py run server. And if we do that, we get an error message. We'll read that in a second, but it's saying that the server is live at 127.0.0.1 at port 8000. And yep, looks like that worked. The install worked successfully. Congratulations, you are seeing this page because debug equals true is in your settings file. Remember we looked at the settings file earlier. This has all the global settings for the whole project. So debug equals true is one of those. And you have not configured any URLs. Right, we have not configured any URLs. We've not gotten there yet. So if we look at the to-do folder again, this is the main configuration by default, the main configuration folder for the project. And we don't have any URLs in here. We have an admin URL and nothing else. And then in settings, let's just do a command F for debug. Let's see, debug equals true. So let's see what happens if we do debug equals false. Just see what happens here. You must set settings.allowed hosts if debug equals false. Okay, so we actually can't do this for right now. That is fine. So you would only want to set debug to false if you were pushing this into production, if you were creating a live website, if this was something that other people could interact with on a server. But we're just doing this on our own computer, so we're not going to need to worry about debug for now. So in settings, we have an installed apps setting. And these are all built-in things with Django. We don't need to worry about these, but we did just make our own app, remember? We made an app called Home. So we're going to need to add Home into here, and we can add a little comment. Just anything below this is going to be local apps instead of the Django apps. Let's come down here. Middleware, again, more stuff built into Django. Root URL conf, todo.urls. So we could make more urls files. We could come into home and make another urls.py file and then load that file into the main urls file. And we are determining that to do the folder .urls. So urls.py inside of to do. This is going to be the main urls file. We have templates right here. So remember what we're doing right now. Right now what we want to do is we want to get an HTML page loaded so that we can see that our code is working the way that we expect it to. So that's what templates is. Templates is going to be where should we look for HTML files. So we can come into DIRs and let's create templates with a slash at the end. And now Django will be looking for a folder called templates inside of the root directory for any HTML files. So let's do that. Let's close this up. In to do, we want a new folder called templates because that's what we just typed here in settings. And then in templates, we can create our HTML files. So let's do home.html. And in VS Code, we're fortunate there is a shortcut. We can just type HTML, do HTML5. And it will give us a default HTML document. So let's just, as simple as we can, let's just do a hello world. Just see that that works. What we now have to do is we have to direct Django to load this file. So the way that we do that is we can come into our app and we can say, okay, let's create a view. Because remember, a view is how we're going to interact with our browser, with our users. So we can say, we have to create a function for this. Define, let's call it home, because again, we are creating a home page here. And it will take a parameter called request. This will be the request that we send to the project to do whatever we want it to do. So home request, and then return render, and render is this function up here that's being imported from Django shortcuts. This is in here by default. So return render request is going to be the first parameter, the request that we're sending to this URL, and then the name of the file that we want to load. So in this case, we want to load home.html. Okay, so we have a view where we're saying load this HTML file in templates. Now we have to say what URL is going to load this view. Okay, and the reason why we have a view, because you might say, why wouldn't we just tell the URL to load an HTML file? The reason why we have the view in the middle is in case we want to add logic to it, code that's going to do more with the HTML file. And we'll get there in this tutorial, but be patient with me. So we've created the view. Now we need to go into URLs. And typically what people do is they come into the app and then they do new file. They do urls.py. Remember, in settings, we have our main URLs file. So we're going to have to import this file into our main one. We'll show you how to do that. Let's just take this main urls.py file, copy this into our new one. Let's get rid of all this text that Django auto generates for us. We're also not going to need the admin stuff, so we can get rid of that. Okay, so now the URL we want to do, we can just put a pair of empty quotation marks, and this is going to mean, right here, if we look at the server, it's 127.0.0.1. That's just your local host. That means that this is running on your computer. And then port 8000, so it's running on your computer on port 8000. And these empty quotation marks are going to reference the direct port that we are running the project on. What we could also do is we could do something like /home, and then this would turn into localhost at port 8000 /home. Or we could do /home /to-do list, and then this would turn into localhost at port 8000 /home /to-do list. And you see how this goes. You can make dynamic URLs. We're not going to get into that in this tutorial though. So now that we know where we want the URL to load, we want to say, what do we want to load onto the URL? And we want to load the view that we just made, which is going to load the HTML document that we've created. So we want to say, from this folder, from this app that we are currently in, import views. And that's going to import the views file. So then we can say views.home, and that's going to go into the views file, and it's going to import the home function. Cool. One more thing we can do here, we can do name equals home. And the reason why we might want to do this is in case we ever change the URL for this, we're not going to have to modify the URL in any documents that we have. We can just, it'll still work because the name will hopefully never change. Okay, so we've created our URL pattern. Now remember, we need to load this into our main URL file now, because this is URLs in our home app. We now need to load it into our main urls.py folder. So the way that we do that is we come in here, we just do an import. We say from home, import URLs as home underscore URLs. And this last part right here, as home URLs, is only because if we had multiple apps that we were importing, let's say we had another one called, let's say we had another one called blog. We would then say from blog import URLs, and we don't want to have the same name. You see what I'm saying? We want urls.py to be consistent, but we obviously can't import URLs here and then import URLs there. It doesn't work in code. So then we would do as blog underscore URLs, but just a little tidbit there. So then what we can do, one more thing. We're going to need another function called include from Django URLs. So from path include, import include. So we can come down here, we'll make another path, same thing. We're going to do empty quotation marks because this is just going to say append all of the home URLs onto the root URL. If we were to do something here like we were to say home, then all of the URLs that we have in here would have home in front of them. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to add this onto the root URL. So then what we can do is include home URLs. And this, let me have an auto formatter on. Okay, so now we should be good to go. We're going to need to rerun our server because we broke it when we played around with the debug setting. So let's do Python manage.py run server. All right, so this should be running, and I haven't forgotten about this error message. We'll come back to this in a second. Let's refresh, and now we are loading that HTML document. We get our hello world just like we were expecting. Perfect. Okay, so let's look at this error message right here. You have 18 unapplied migrations. Your project may not work properly until you apply the migrations for your apps, admin, auth, content type, sessions. Run python manage.py migrate to apply them. Okay, well, let's just listen to the error message. Let's run this command. All right. So what did this actually do right here? Well, if we come back over to our folder structure over here, we notice we have a new file called db.sqlite3. So this is the default database that will be created when you're running a Django project and you do a migrate. So this is where we're actually going to be storing our data. This is pretty cool, right? If you've never had a database before, if you've never worked with a database before, it auto-generates this for you. And not all databases can come in a nice clean little file like this. SQLite 3 is unique like that, but it's also not the most powerful database. Nobody, I think, would recommend it to use in a professional production environment. You wouldn't want to use it on a server or anything like that. So this is good for development, it's good for learning, and we'll use it for that purpose in this tutorial. But know that in the future, SQLite 3 is not the best database to use. If you did want to know, you should use PostgreSQL. That's more or less the universally agreed upon database that people use with Django projects. So let's figure out that let's modify our template a little bit, because we know we want to make a to-do list. So let's change our title. Let's call this to-do list. And then we know we want a list. So we want an unordered list, so UL. And then let's make a couple example list items. So let's do item 1 and then copy and paste that a couple times. So then we have item 2 and item 3. Let's save that. Whoop. Why is that? Oh, because we have to rerun, right? Because we just did migrate. Now we have to do python manage.py, not migrate. We need to do python manage.py run server. All right. Now we're running our server and that error message is gone. Perfect. So we refresh and look at that. To-do list, item 1, item 2, item 3, exactly like we wrote it. So one more thing. We should have a form in here, right? And in the form, we want somewhere to input information, and then we want a submit button. So we can do input type submit and name submit, refresh. Now we have a form. All right, now none of this is functional. This form isn't actually doing anything. We can type in this all day, and that's not going to create items like we want it to. So how do we get this form to create items that are saved in the database we just created? Well, let's do it. So the first thing we'll probably want to do is we'll want to create a Django form. Let's go into home. We'll create another new file, right? We created urls.py before. Now we're going to create forms.py. And we're going to do from Django import forms. This is a very handy module. And we can say class, let's call this home form. And it's going to inherit from forms.form. Let's say the item that we want to, let's call this an item. We're going to submit a to-do list item. And the to-do list item is going to take in a char field, which is, this is short for a character field. We're going to be typing text into here. This is going to be a required field. So required equals true. Let's say it has a max length of 100 characters. Is there anything else we need in here? Required true, max length. Let's, there's going to be one more thing. We'll come back to it in a second though. So required equals true, max length equals 100. And now if we go to home, what we can do instead of input, oh, one more thing. Sorry. I was going to say we can load the form into here, but remember there's a middleman between the HTML and the data. It's our views.py file. So what we want to do here then is we'll want to import our form. So from this app, the folder that URL that views.py is in. So from this folder, import forms. Oh, actually, let's do from this folder. So from .forms, from the forms file in this folder, import home form. And then in our view, we can say form equals home form. And this is either going to intake request.post or none. That means that if we're sending a post request, then the home form will intake that data. But if we're not getting a post request, then we're not going to input any data into here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create a variable. We'll call it context. This is a common name for this variable. So context equals, and we'll set it equal to a dictionary value. We'll say form maps to our form variable. And then what we want to do is we want to pass context into our render function. So what this is doing now is we're saying take our form that we just created in forms.py, and then we're saying map a name called form to the form we created, and then pass auto formatter, sorry, and then pass this form into our HTML document. So if we come back to our HTML document, homes.html, now we can load this variable. And the way we load a variable, this is using something called Jinja, which comes with Django. We can do double curly brackets and then form in the middle. So now if we save this and we come back over here, we refresh, we get item, right? Because that's what if we come back to forms.py, that's what we called this name right here. This intakes item. And we can do our submit still, but we don't need this item right in front here. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw one more thing onto here. We're going to say label equals empty quotation marks, and that'll just get rid of that item text in the beginning. So we are done with forms.py. We've done that. What is left? What we want to do is we want to be able to submit this form and add an item. One more thing real quick, sorry. In views.py, we said intake data from request.post. So if it's a post request, so we want to make sure that our form is sending a post request. So method equals post. Cool. Something about Django forms though, when we send a post request, so if we refresh this page and we try to create an item called ASDF, it'll say forbidden, CSRF verification failed, request aborted. So in all Django forms, we need to have a CSRF token, and we can do this with the following syntax: a curly bracket and then a % on both ends with the name CSRF underscore token in the middle of all that. So we save that. Let's refresh our page again. Now if we do ASDF, it works. It doesn't do anything, but it doesn't break. So now what we want to do is we want to take this data and we want to load it into our list, right? We want to save the data into our database and then load information from our database into the list. So we're going to want to, because now we're interacting with the database, this means that we're going to be going into our models.py file. So home app models.py file, it'll say create your models here. And what we'll do is we will create another class. This one we'll call item, because it's a to-do list item, and it will inherit from models.model, and models is being imported up here, Django from Django.db import models. And then what we'll do is we'll say the name of this item is equal to models.carfield. This looks a lot like the form, doesn't it, right? Remember when we did item equals forms.carfield? Now we're doing name equals models.carfield. And it's going to take very similar parameters. Let's do a max length of 100, because that's what we did in the forms. We give the form a max length of 100. And then something else we'll say here is we'll say blank equals false. We don't want to submit a to-do item that doesn't have a name. That doesn't make sense. So we create that. And now we'll get a warning over here from our server. It says auto-created primary key used when not defining primary key. Hint, configure default auto field. Okay, so we're not going to worry about this one. This is a warning, not an error. We're not going to worry about this for right now. But what we do need to do is this is now going to go into our database. So what we can do, I have a program called db browser. Let me pull this up. DB browser for SQLite, and you can get this by just Googling it, DB browser for SQLite. And you can come here and you can do download. It's very, very easy to set up. And once you have this, what you can do is you can click Open Database. You can navigate to your project, and you can just double click on that db.sqlite3 file, and now we can actually visually interact with our database. So this is, right now, it's just all of the default Django tables. There's nothing special about what's in here right now. There's nothing specific to our project. So what we'll do is we just created something specific for our project, right? We just created this, this item class. So now we can cancel out our server, just Control C, and we'll want to do Python. Remember last time we did Python manage.py migrate? Well, now we need to do Python manage.py make migrations. So this is looking for any new changes that we've made. And this is going to tell us create model. So it's created our model item. And now what we can do, now we can do that command we did before, Python manage.py migrate. Cool. So that has worked. And now if we come over here and look, we refresh this. Okay. So I just switched tabs and then back to refresh. Now we have this table called home_item. Home is the name of our app and item is the name of our model. So if we come in here, we also see that we have a name, right? Because that's what we assigned to this. We assigned it a name. Isn't that cool? So this is actually registered in our database now. Now what we need to do is we need to make our form save rows of data into our database. So the way we do that is we come back into our views and we want to check if the form was submitted. So we'll say if request dot method is equal to post. That means that the form was submitted because our form is creating a post method. So if request.method equals post and form.isValid, so this means that our Django form was submitted properly and it was given the input that we expected. So if request.method equals post and form.isValid, then we want to say the name of our item, let's call this item name, is equal to form.cleanedData, and that's going to format the form data in a way that Django can interact with it. .get, now we're going to get a specific piece of information from the form, and we want to get item, because in our forms.py file, we named this field item. So coming back here, now what we want to do is we want to create an item to save to our database. So from .models, right, from the models file in this app, import item. So we want to create an instance of our item. So we'll say item equals an instance of our item model. And then we'll say item.name equals item name. And right, because item is an instance of our item model. And then the name attribute is this right here, this attribute that we gave it called name. So item.name equals item name, and item name is what we got from the form. Now what we want to do is we want to do item.save. Cool. So if we do this, we'll actually save anything we submit in the form to our database as a to-do list item. So now, if we have items, we want to display items, which means that we need to pass that information along into our HTML form. So let's create another piece of context. We'll say items maps to the item model, right, that we created in our models.py file, item.objects.all. And this is going to get all records of items. So we can save this, auto format. Okay, so now we have an items variable that's being passed into home.html. So we can come back to home.html, and instead of hard coding item 1, item 2, item 3, what we can do is we can create a for loop in Jinja. So we'll do that same format that we did for the CSRF token, where we have the curly brackets and the percent signs, and we'll do 2 of these. The first one, we're going to say for item in items. And then the second one, we're going to say end for. So this is how Django and Jinja are recognizing that we're looping through the items that we're passing to it. So now we want to say for each item in items, we want to create a list item in our HTML document. So we'll then say, now we want to do a variable, right? The same way as we did the form, we passed the form variable. Now we want to pass the items variable, but we want to get each individual item. So item. So we'll save that. Now if we refresh, let me just click and enter. Oh, need to do our classic Python manage.py run server. All right. Refresh. All right, notice we have no list here because we haven't created any objects yet, but we can do this. I'll just type in ASDF. Look at that, item object 1, but that's not exactly what we were expecting, right? We were expecting ASDF. So what we need to do is not just item, we need to do item.name, because in our model, the name attribute is what we care about here, right? So if we refresh, let's not do a submit, let's just do this. Now we notice we get that ASDF, and we can do this again. To do item. What did I have over here before? Workout, study. These are all things that are being added to the database now that we are reading from the database in this list. So if you have followed this tutorial all the way through, you've done it. This is the end of the project. If you want to keep building onto it, feel free. There's a lot of stuff you can do. I encourage you to figure out how to delete items. If you want to play around with the design, feel free to play around with the design. But this has been an intro to Django using Python and some HTML. If you guys have any questions, please feel to drop them in the comments. And if you got value out of this video, please like, please subscribe, please tell your friends. And I will be trying to put out more content. I'm trying to think of more tutorials to teach you guys. So I will see you later. Peace.